She came to drive passengers, not perform surgery. But when the city bus collided with a fuel truck at rush hour and emergency responders were overwhelmed, 50 witnesses watched in stunned silence as the quiet taxi driver transformed a chaotic street corner into a field hospital and saved 100 lives with nothing but her bare hands and a first aid kit. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. At 5:30 a.m. every morning, Elena Rodriguez started her shift the same way. Black coffee from the corner deli, quick check of her yellow Crown Victoria's oil and tire pressure, then 12 hours navigating Chicago's streets with passengers who rarely looked up from their phones long enough to notice her face. She was 34 years old, average height, dark brown hair always pulled back in a simple ponytail, wearing the same rotation of 3 polo shirts and khaki pants that had seen better days. Her taxi smelled faintly of vanilla air freshener and worn vinyl seats. Nothing remarkable about vehicle number 847 in a fleet of hundreds. Elena preferred the early morning airport runs. Passengers were usually half asleep, focused on catching flights, not interested in conversation. She'd learned over her 3 years driving to keep interactions minimal and professional. "Good morning, where to?" followed by silence punctuated only by GPS directions and the occasional, "Thank you, have a safe trip." The anonymity suited her perfectly. In a city of 3 million people, she was just another face behind the wheel, invisible and unremarkable. Exactly how she wanted it. The dispatch radio crackled constantly with driver chatter, complaints about traffic, requests for backup at busy locations, arguments over prime pickup spots downtown. Elena never participated in the conversations. She'd key her microphone only for essential communication, confirming pickups, reporting her availability, acknowledging dispatch instructions. Other drivers had stopped trying to engage her in the casual banter that filled slow periods between fares. They assumed she was antisocial or maybe didn't speak English well. Though her Chicago accent was as authentic as deep dish pizza, her passengers came from every walk of life. Business executives rushing to meetings, tourists clutching guidebooks and cameras, elderly residents heading to medical appointments, college students counting crumpled bills to pay the fare. Elena treated them all with the same quiet efficiency. She knew the fastest routes to avoid construction zones, which restaurants stayed open late, where to find parking near popular destinations. Her 5-star rating on taxi apps reflected her reliability, not her personality. Comments praised her punctuality and clean vehicle, never mentioning memorable conversations or personal connections. Most passengers barely registered her presence beyond confirming their destination. She was part of the urban landscape, like traffic lights or parking meters, functional but forgettable. Business travelers made phone calls discussing deals worth millions while Elena navigated through downtown traffic, overhearing confidential information that could move stock prices. Teenagers gossiped about relationship drama. Parents coordinated complicated family schedules. Tourists debated which attractions to visit first. To them, she was a chauffeur, not a person with her own story worth acknowledging. Elena's apartment reflected the same deliberate simplicity as her work persona. A modest 1-bedroom unit in a quiet neighborhood, furnished with basics from discount stores. No photos on walls, no personal mementos visible to casual observers. Her refrigerator held enough food for simple meals. Her closet contained practical clothing in neutral colors. Neighbors knew her as the polite woman in 3B who kept to herself, paid rent on time, never caused problems. Building management appreciated tenants like Elena, who maintained their units well and avoided drama with other residents. The only hint of her past life was locked in a small metal box hidden behind winter coats in her bedroom closet. Inside, carefully wrapped in plastic, were items she couldn't bring herself to discard. but rarely looked at anymore. A faded photograph of 8 soldiers in desert camouflage, dog tags on a chain she no longer wore, commendation letters with official letterhead, and a Purple Heart medal she'd never displayed. These artifacts belonged to Sergeant Elena Rodriguez, combat medic, 2nd Battalion, who had saved countless lives during 3 deployments in Afghanistan. But that person felt like someone else entirely, a character from a story she'd rather forget. Elena's driving route took her through diverse neighborhoods that told Chicago's complex story. Wealthy areas where doormen helped passengers into her taxi. Middle-class suburbs where families loaded luggage for airport trips. Struggling communities where people counted change carefully before requesting rides. She observed everything with eyes trained to assess situations quickly, though she rarely acted on those observations. Street corners where teenagers gathered in patterns that suggested drug activity. Domestic arguments visible through apartment windows. Elderly pedestrians walking unsteadily who might need assistance. Her training whispered warnings and suggested interventions, but civilian Elena Rodriguez minded her own business and drove her assigned routes. Other taxi drivers gathered at the airport staging area during slow periods, sharing coffee and complaints about gas prices, difficult passengers, competition from ride-sharing apps. Elena parked at the edge of the lot, engine running, reading paperback novels she bought from hospital gift shops. Romance novels, mysteries, science fiction, anything that transported her mind away from memories that surfaced during quiet moments. She developed the habit of always having background noise or mental distraction, avoiding the silence that allowed unwanted thoughts to intrude. The taxi company's dispatch center knew Elena as their most reliable driver. Never late for shifts, never called in sick, never involved in accidents or customer complaints. Her supervisor had tried several times to convince her to train new drivers or take on additional responsibilities, but she consistently declined any role that would increase her visibility or require interaction with management. She preferred assignments that kept her moving, handling routine pickups and drop-offs that required minimal decision-making. Elena's medical knowledge remained carefully hidden beneath her taxi driver persona. She'd renewed her MT certification quietly, paying for refresher courses with cash, listing her occupation as transportation rather than specifying taxi driver. The instructors never questioned why someone in transportation needed medical training, assuming she worked for an ambulance service or medical transport company. She told herself it was just practical preparation, like keeping jumper cables in her trunk or knowing basic car repair. Emergency skills were useful for anyone, regardless of their current profession. Late-night shifts brought different passengers with different stories. Hospital workers exhausted after double shifts, bar patrons trying to get home safely, overnight shift workers starting or ending their days while most of the city slept. Elena preferred these hours because darkness provided additional anonymity, and fewer passengers meant less conversation. She'd learned which areas to avoid during certain hours, which pickup locations typically involved intoxicated passengers who might become problematic, how to position her vehicle for quick exits if situations became uncomfortable. The radio dispatch system connected her to hundreds of other drivers across the city, creating a network of professional relationships that remained entirely impersonal. Drivers were identified by vehicle numbers and locations, not names or personal details. Elena was simply car 847, available for pickup at specified coordinates, reliable for airport runs and long-distance fares that other drivers sometimes avoided. The anonymity of radio communication suited her perfectly, allowing professional competence without personal connection. 3 years of driving had created routines that structured her days with predictable rhythms. Morning coffee, vehicle inspection. First pickup, usually a business traveler or early airport run, followed by the steady flow of fares that defined her 12-hour shifts. Lunch breaks at different locations to avoid patterns. Afternoon pickups often involving medical appointments or shopping trips. evening rush hour with commuters heading home, then late-night fares until her shift ended. Each day blended into the next, creating the comfortable monotony she'd chosen over the intensity of her previous life. Chicago General Hospital's emergency entrance buzzer, with activity 24 hours a day. Ambulances arriving with sirens wailing, paramedics rushing. Patients through automatic doors, medical staff moving with practiced urgency between crisis and routine. Elena frequently dropped passengers at the medical complex, usually family members visiting patients or medical workers starting their shifts. She'd park in the designated taxi zone, help passengers with their belongings, then drive away without lingering. The hospital represented everything she'd left behind. A world of life and death decisions where seconds mattered and mistakes had permanent consequences. Dr. Sarah Chun, head of emergency medicine, had worked at Chicago General for 8 years and knew every taxi driver who regularly serviced the hospital. Most were middle-aged men who complained about parking restrictions and asked for tips when helping elderly patients with wheelchairs. She barely noticed the quiet woman who drove the yellow Crown Victoria, just another face in the constant stream of transportation providers who delivered patients and visitors to their doors. When Elena helped passengers navigate the hospital's confusing entrance system, Dr. Chun assumed she was simply being courteous for better tips, not recognizing the way Elena automatically assessed each person's mobility and potential medical needs. The emergency medical services community in Chicago operated within strict hierarchies that everyone understood implicitly. Paramedics respected emergency room physicians, EMTs deferred to paramedics, hospital security followed medical staff directions, and civilian drivers stayed out of the way during medical emergencies. Elena had observed these dynamics hundreds of times while waiting for passengers outside hospitals, clinics, and medical facilities. She understood the protocols, the terminology, the unspoken rules that governed how different professionals interacted during crisis situations. Paramedic teams, working out of Station 19, covered the downtown district where Elena drove most frequently. Marcus Johnson and Lisa Park had been partners for 4 years, handling everything from heart attacks to trauma cases with the confidence that came from extensive training and daily experience. They recognized Elena's taxi among the vehicles that regularly picked up hospital staff, but she registered only as part of the urban background. When they saw her helping elderly passengers navigate hospital entrances, they assumed she was motivated by customer service concerns, not medical awareness. During busy periods, Elena sometimes found herself waiting in hospital parking areas, while passengers visited family members or attended medical appointments. She'd observe the controlled chaos of emergency medicine from a distance, watching ambulances arrive, medical teams respond to various situations, families dealing with crisis and uncertainty. Her trained eyes caught details that civilian observers would miss. The way paramedics moved indicated injury severity. Certain equipment configurations suggested specific medical protocols. Body language among medical staff revealed stress levels and decision-making processes. The taxi driver break room at Chicago General was a small space adjacent to the main parking area, equipped with vending machines, plastic chairs, and a television usually tuned to news or sports channels. Drivers would gather there during slow periods, sharing complaints about traffic patterns, difficult passengers, and competition from ride-sharing services. Elena rarely used the break room, preferring to wait in her vehicle, but occasionally she'd overhear conversations about medical emergencies they'd witnessed or transported patients they'd driven to various facilities. Frank Morrison had driven taxis in Chicago for 15 years and considered himself an expert on medical transport. He regularly bragged about his knowledge of hospital procedures, emergency protocols, and medical terminology he'd picked up from countless rides with healthcare workers. Other drivers deferred to his opinions about which hospitals handled specific conditions best, optimal routes during emergency situations, and how to interact with medical professionals. Frank barely acknowledged Elena's presence during the rare occasions when she joined driver conversations, dismissing her as another newcomer who hadn't earned the right to contribute medical insights. Elena's fares often included healthcare workers commuting between shifts, medical students heading to rotations, and specialists traveling between multiple hospital locations. She'd listen to their conversations about patient cases, treatment protocols, and hospital politics while navigating traffic through Chicago's medical district. The passengers rarely considered that their taxi driver might understand the clinical terminology they used or recognize the significance of their discussions about complex medical procedures. Dr. Michael Torres, a trauma surgeon with 20 years of experience, used Elena's taxi service regularly for late-night rides home after emergency surgeries. He appreciated her reliability and quiet professionalism, never realizing that she understood every detail of his phone conversations with colleagues about surgical techniques, patient outcomes, and hospital resource allocation. To Dr. Torres, Elena was simply a competent transportation provider, not someone capable of meaningful contribution to medical discussions. The hierarchy extended beyond hospitals to the broader emergency response community. Police officers who worked accident scenes, firefighters trained in emergency medical response, and various civilian support personnel all had defined roles that rarely overlapped. Taxi drivers occupied the lowest tier of this hierarchy, viewed as transportation providers rather than potential contributors to emergency situations. Elena had witnessed countless medical emergencies during her 3 years of driving, but protocol dictated that civilian drivers should clear the area and let professionals handle crisis situations. Chicago's emergency dispatch system coordinated responses between police, fire, and medical services with sophisticated protocols that had evolved over decades. Elena listened to scanner traffic during quiet periods, following major incidents across the city and observing how different agencies coordinated their efforts. She understood the codes, recognized the voices of veteran dispatchers, and could predict response patterns based on location and incident type. Other taxi drivers occasionally monitored emergency scanners to avoid traffic delays, but none demonstrated Elena's comprehensive understanding of emergency operations. The medical transport community included specialized ambulance services, medical, helicopter operations, and various civilian contractors who moved patients between facilities. Elena's taxi service occasionally received requests for non-emergency medical transport, usually elderly patients who needed assistance getting to routine appointments. These assignments required basic knowledge of mobility equipment and patient comfort considerations, skills that Elena possessed but attributed to common sense rather than specialized training. Hospital security personnel knew Elena by sight as one of the regular taxi drivers, but they'd never had reason to interact with her beyond basic parking and access control issues. Security Chief Robert Martinez appreciated drivers who followed hospital policies about designated pickup areas and patient privacy regulations, noting that Elena consistently complied with all requirements without needing reminders. He considered her a model of professional civilian behavior around medical facilities, never suspecting her background included security clearance and protection responsibilities that exceeded his own experience. The nursing staff at Chicago General worked closely with paramedic teams, sharing information about patient conditions and coordinating care transitions from ambulance to emergency room. Elena had observed these handoff procedures hundreds of times while waiting for passengers, noticing the critical communication patterns that ensured continuity of care. She understood the importance of accurate information transfer, proper documentation protocols, and team coordination during high-stress situations, knowledge that seemed like casual observation to anyone who might notice her attention to medical procedures. Emergency medical technician training programs in Chicago emphasized the importance of maintaining professional boundaries and respecting the expertise Hierarchy that governed emergency response situations. Students learn to recognize their scope of practice, defer to higher trained professionals, and avoid overstepping their certification limits. Elena had watched EMT students practice procedures in hospital parking areas during their clinical rotations, observing their careful adherence to protocols and instructor supervision. Their dedication reminded her of her own medical training years earlier. Though the context and stakes had been dramatically different, the assumption that taxi drivers possessed only basic first aid knowledge, if any medical training at all, was so universal that medical professionals never questioned it. Elena's interactions with healthcare workers remained strictly professional and transportation-focused, with conversations limited to pickup locations, destination preferences, and occasionally traffic route suggestions. Her medical vocabulary remained carefully hidden, her clinical insights unexpressed, her assessment capabilities invisible to the very people who shared her commitment to saving lives through different professional channels. During a routine airport pickup on a Tuesday morning, Elena noticed her passenger gripping his left arm while struggling with his suitcase. The businessman was sweating despite the cool autumn weather, his breathing slightly labored as he climbed into the back seat. Most drivers would have attributed his discomfort to the stress of catching an early flight, but Elena observed the subtle pallor around his lips, the way he unconsciously loosened his tie, the particular pattern of his breathing that suggested something more serious than travel anxiety. "Sir," she said quietly, glancing in the rearview mirror, "there's a medical clinic 2 blocks from here. Might be worth a quick stop before your flight." The passenger looked surprised. "I'm fine, just running late. Need to get to O'Hare immediately." Elena noticed him continuing to massage his left arm, his movements becoming more restricted. She'd seen these symptoms before in conditions where minutes could determine outcomes. The clinic offers rapid cardiac screenings. Takes less time than security delays if you're not feeling optimal. Her passenger stared at her reflection in the mirror. "How did you know I was concerned about my heart?" Elena simply adjusted the route toward the medical facility without answering directly. 20 minutes later, the businessman was in an emergency room receiving treatment for an early stage myocardial infarction that could have killed him at 30,000 feet. He never learned that his taxi driver had potentially saved his life with a subtle observation that emergency room physicians later confirmed was remarkably accurate for a civilian. At Chicago General's emergency entrance, Elena frequently waited, while family members visited patients upstairs. During one such wait, she observed a young mother carrying her infant toward the hospital doors. The baby's breathing pattern caught Elena's attention immediately, along with the slight blue tinge around the child's fingernails that most people would dismiss as normal coloration in cool weather. The mother seemed frustrated rather than alarmed, talking on her phone about missed pediatrician appointments and insurance complications. Elena rolled down her window and called out gently, "Excuse me, ma'am." The mother approached the taxi, bouncing the baby automatically while continuing her phone conversation. Elena could see the infant's chest retractions more clearly now, the subtle signs of respiratory distress that would worsen rapidly without intervention. "Your baby should be seen immediately," Elena said quietly. "Not in the general pediatric clinic upstairs. Taken directly to the emergency department entrance." The mother looked confused. "His appointment isn't until next week. I'm just visiting my grandmother." Elena noticed the infant's skin color changing, the breathing becoming more labored. "Please trust me. Tell them the baby has respiratory distress with cyanosis." Those exact words. "They'll see him immediately." Something in Elena's tone convinced the mother to change direction toward the emergency entrance. 30 minutes later, the infant was receiving oxygen therapy for a serious respiratory condition that could have resulted in cardiac arrest if left untreated. The emergency physician noted that someone had used precisely correct medical terminology to describe the child's condition. Though the mother couldn't explain how a taxi driver had known such specific clinical language, during late-night shifts, Elena sometimes transported hospital staff who discussed challenging cases during their rides home. Dr. Amanda Phillips, an emergency medicine resident, regularly used Elena's taxi service after exhausting shifts. One night, Dr. Phillips received a phone call about a patient with unusual symptoms that had stumped the medical team. "We can't figure out what's causing the neurological presentations," Dr. Phillips explained to her colleague over the phone. 30-year-old male, sudden onset confusion, speech difficulties, no obvious trauma or substance abuse. Elena listened while navigating traffic, her medical training automatically processing the symptom constellation. The combination suggested several possibilities that might not be immediately obvious to physicians focused on common diagnoses. "Have you considered hypoglycemia masquerading as stroke symptoms?" Elena asked quietly during a pause in the phone conversation. Dr. Phillips looked startled. "What did you say?" Elena realized she'd spoken without thinking. "Sorry, I couldn't help overhearing. My grandmother had similar symptoms once. Turned out to be low blood sugar that looked like a stroke." Dr. Phillips ended her phone call and stared at Elena's reflection. "That's actually a sophisticated differential diagnosis. How did you know to suggest that?" Elena felt her heart rate increase, realizing she'd revealed more medical knowledge than a taxi driver should possess. "I watch a lot of medical shows," she said lamely, knowing the explanation sounded insufficient. When Dr. Phillips returned to the hospital and suggested the hypoglycemia workup, they discovered that the patient indeed had severe low blood sugar caused by an undiagnosed pancreatic condition. The correct diagnosis led to immediate treatment that prevented permanent neurological damage. Dr. Phillips never forgot the taxi driver who had suggested a diagnosis that medical school had taught her to consider, but emergency medicine rotations had trained her to overlook in favor of more common conditions. Elena's observations extended beyond individual medical cases to patterns she noticed in hospital operations. During flu season, she observed increased ambulance traffic, changes in emergency department staffing patterns, and subtle indicators of system stress that suggested potential capacity problems. When other taxi drivers complained about longer wait times at hospitals, Elena could predict which facilities would be overwhelmed based on early warning signs she'd learned to recognize during her military medical experience. Frank Morrison, the veteran taxi driver who considered himself an expert on medical transport, occasionally asked Elena about her observations during busy hospital periods. He'd noticed that she seemed unusually aware of emergency department operations, able to predict which hospitals would have shorter wait times or better availability for specific types of cases. "You seem to know a lot about how hospitals work," Frank commented during one of their rare conversations in the driver break room. "You ever work in healthcare before driving?" Elena deflected the question carefully. "You pick up things after 3 years of hospital runs. Same way you learned about traffic patterns and airport procedures." Frank wasn't entirely satisfied with her answer, but Elena's ability to predict hospital capacity and emergency department delays proved valuable information that other drivers appreciated. Her insights helped them avoid facilities that were overwhelmed, improving their efficiency and passenger satisfaction without revealing the medical expertise behind her observations. Medical supply deliveries occasionally required taxi transport when regular delivery vehicles were unavailable. Elena received several such assignments, transporting critical medications and equipment between facilities. During these runs, she demonstrated familiarity with proper handling procedures for temperature-sensitive medications, sterile equipment, protocols, and chain of custody requirements that impressed hospital receiving staff. "She knows how to handle medical supplies properly," noted Janet Stevens, a pharmacy coordinator at Chicago General. "Most taxi drivers don't understand the importance of maintaining cold chain storage or sterile packaging integrity." Elena's careful attention to medical supply transport led to additional assignments handling sensitive deliveries, though she avoided any role that would require detailed background checks or security clearance verification. She preferred assignments that utilized her knowledge while maintaining her anonymity, contributing to healthcare delivery without exposing her military medical background. During a busy evening shift, Elena transported Dr. Martinez, an orthopedic surgeon, to an emergency consultation at another hospital. Dr. Martinez was reviewing X-ray images on his tablet, discussing the case with colleagues via conference call. The patient had suffered a complex fracture that required immediate surgical intervention. The angle suggests we're dealing with a displaced spiral fracture of the tibia, Dr. Martinez explained to his colleagues. Timing is critical to prevent vascular compromise. Elena glanced at the X-ray reflection in her rearview mirror and noticed something the medical team seemed to have missed. The image showed subtle signs of compartment syndrome development that would require immediate fasciotomy to prevent permanent damage. "Doctor," she said quietly, "that patient might need compartment pressure monitoring. The soft tissue swelling pattern looks concerning." Dr. Martinez stopped his phone conversation and looked at Elena with surprise. "How can you see compartment syndrome indicators from driving position?" Elena realized she'd made another mistake, revealing knowledge that exceeded civilian expectations. "My brother was in the Army. He had a similar injury and talked about compartment syndrome complications." "Doctor." Martinez studied the X-ray more carefully and realized Elena was correct. The patient did show early signs of compartment syndrome that required immediate surgical decompression. Her observation potentially saved the patient's leg and highlighted diagnostic details that the medical team had initially missed. Dr. James Crawford had been Chicago General's emergency department chief for 12 years and prided himself on maintaining strict professional standards. When word spread through the hospital that a taxi driver had been offering medical opinions to physicians, he immediately called a department meeting to address what he considered a serious boundary violation. "I don't care how many medical dramas someone has watched," Dr. Crawford announced to the assembled emergency staff. "Taxi drivers diagnosing compartment syndrome and suggesting cardiac screenings crosses every line of professional appropriateness. We cannot allow civilians to practice medicine without licenses." The meeting included Dr. Phillips, Dr. Martinez, and several other physicians who had experienced Elena's unexpectedly accurate medical observations. Dr. Phillips attempted to defend Elena's contributions, explaining how her suggestion about hypoglycemia had led to a correct diagnosis that prevented permanent neurological damage. "That's exactly the problem," Dr. Crawford interrupted. "Lucky guesses from untrained civilians create dangerous precedents. What happens when this taxi driver suggests the wrong diagnosis and someone dies? We'd be liable for accepting medical advice from someone with no credentials, no training, no accountability." Dr. Martinez nodded reluctantly, though he privately remembered how Elena's observation about compartment syndrome had saved his patient's leg. The medical hierarchy demanded clear boundaries between trained professionals and civilian observers. Regardless of outcome accuracy, the hospital administration issued a formal memo to all staff regarding inappropriate medical consultations with non-licensed personnel. The document specifically mentioned taxi drivers and other transportation providers, instructing medical staff to politely decline any unsolicited medical opinions and report persistent violations to hospital security. Elena became aware of the new policy when Dr. Phillips awkwardly explained during a ride that she could no longer discuss patient cases or accept medical suggestions during their taxi conversations. The rejection stung more than Elena expected, reminding her of the isolation she'd chosen by abandoning her medical career. "I understand," Elena replied quietly, focusing on traffic navigation while struggling with feelings of dismissal and professional invalidation. "I was just trying to help." Dr. Phillips felt guilty about the conversation, but followed hospital protocol, creating an uncomfortable distance between them that persisted during subsequent rides. Elena noticed similar changes in other medical professional passengers who had previously engaged in casual medical discussions during their taxi rides. The exclusion from medical conversations reminded Elena why she'd left healthcare in the first place. The rigid hierarchies, the assumption that credentials mattered more than knowledge, the dismissal of insights based on source rather than accuracy all represented everything she'd grown to hate about institutional medicine. Frank Morrison heard about the hospital memo through his connections with other drivers and took perverse satisfaction in Elena's apparent comeuppance. He'd always resented her quiet confidence and mysterious knowledge of medical procedures, interpreting her competence as arrogance that needed correction. "Told you that new driver was getting too big for her britches," Frank announced to other taxi drivers gathered in the hospital break room, thinking she knows more than doctors with decades of training. Hospital finally put her in her place. The other drivers laughed and shared their own stories about passengers who assumed taxi drivers were interested in unsolicited advice about various professional topics. Elena listened from her parked vehicle outside, hearing their mockery through the break room's open window. "Maybe now she'll stick to driving instead of playing doctor," Frank continued loudly, ensuring his voice carried to Elena's taxi. "Leave medicine to people who actually went to medical school instead of watching Grey's Anatomy reruns." The laughter from the break room intensified, creating a chorus of dismissal that reinforced Elena's sense of professional exile. She started her engine and drove away without confronting the group, choosing isolation over conflict as she'd learned to do since leaving the military. Elena's relationship with hospital staff became increasingly strained as word of the administration's policy spread through Chicago's medical community. Nurses who had previously appreciated her careful handling of medical supply deliveries now treated her with cool professionalism, maintaining strict boundaries that emphasized her civilian status. Marcus Johnson and Lisa Park, the paramedic team from Station 19, heard about the incident through their connections with emergency department staff. They discussed it during a routine supply run to Chicago General, expressing typical paramedic skepticism about civilian medical knowledge. "Can you believe some taxi driver was trying to diagnose patients?" Marcus said while restocking their ambulance. "These people watch one episode of a medical show and think they understand emergency medicine." Lisa laughed while checking equipment inventory. "Probably thought compartment syndrome was something you treat with aspirin and ice. Good thing the doctors shut that down before someone got hurt." Their conversation was overheard by several emergency department staff who shared similar sentiments about maintaining professional boundaries between trained medical personnel and well-meaning but potentially dangerous civilian advice. Elena's passenger interactions became increasingly awkward as medical professionals who had previously valued her insights now avoided any discussions that might violate the new hospital policy. The silent rides felt like professional rejection, reinforcing her decision to hide her medical background while simultaneously making her question whether anonymity was worth the isolation. Dr. Sarah Chun, who had barely noticed Elena before the controversy, now actively avoided using her taxi service to prevent any potential boundary violations. The head of emergency medicine instructed her staff to use hospital-approved transportation services when possible, effectively blacklisting Elena from regular medical professional passengers. The rejection extended beyond individual physicians to the broader healthcare community. Medical conferences, professional gatherings, and informal networks all reinforced the message that civilian medical opinions were unwelcome and potentially dangerous regardless of their accuracy. Elena's attempts to maintain professional relationships while respecting new boundaries proved impossible. Medical passengers who had previously engaged in friendly conversation now treated her with polite distance, creating an atmosphere of tension that made every healthcare-related ride uncomfortable for both parties. "It's nothing personal, Doctor," Torres explained during what became his final ride with Elena. "Hospital policy is clear about consulting with non-licensed personnel. I'm sure you understand the liability concerns." Elena understood perfectly, having encountered similar institutional protectionism throughout her military medical career. The assumption that credentials automatically determined competence while experience and demonstrated ability counted for nothing represented everything she'd grown to despise about medical bureaucracy. The mockery continued beyond hospital settings. As word of Elena's medical pretensions spread through Chicago's taxi driver community, other drivers who had initially respected her professionalism now treated her as a cautionary tale about overstepping professional boundaries. She actually thought doctors wanted advice from a taxi driver, one veteran driver explained to newer drivers during orientation sessions. "That's what happens when you don't know your place in the pecking order." Elena's isolation deepened as both medical professionals and fellow taxi drivers reinforced her outsider status. The community she'd tried to serve quietly from the margins had rejected her contributions and questioned her motivations, leaving her more alone than ever. The final humiliation came during a medical transport assignment when Elena delivered supplies to Chicago General's emergency department. The receiving nurse, who had previously appreciated Elena's careful handling procedures, now treated her with obvious suspicion. "Just leave the packages at the desk," the nurse instructed coldly. "We'll handle the inventory verification ourselves." Elena realized that her reputation for medical knowledge had transformed from asset to liability, making her suspect in the eyes of people she'd tried to help. The message was clear: stay in your lane, accept your place in the hierarchy, and never presume to contribute beyond your designated role. As Elena drove away from Chicago General that evening, she wondered if her choice to hide her medical background had been wise or cowardly. The rejection hurt more than she'd expected, reopening wounds from her military service that she'd thought had healed during 3 years of civilian anonymity. The morning of October 15th started like any other Tuesday for Elena, with her usual routine of coffee and vehicle inspection before beginning her 12-hour shift. The weather forecast predicted clear skies and moderate traffic, suggesting a routine day of airport runs and hospital pickups. She had no way of knowing that before noon, she would face a choice between maintaining her carefully constructed anonymity and revealing the skills she'd spent 3 years hiding from the world. At 11:47 a.m., Elena was stopped at the intersection of Michigan Avenue and Randolph Street, waiting for a traffic light while her passenger, an elderly woman named Mrs. Patterson, chatted nervously about her upcoming medical appointment. The intersection buzzed with typical downtown activity: business people crossing streets, tourists consulting maps, delivery trucks navigating narrow lanes between parked cars and construction barriers, the Chicago Transit Authority bus approaching from the north carried 43 passengers during the morning rush hour. The driver, Robert Chun, had 22 years of experience navigating city traffic and had never been involved in a serious accident. He was slowing for the red light when the fuel delivery truck ran the cross-street signal at 45 miles per hour, its driver apparently suffering a medical emergency that left him unconscious at the wheel. The collision happened with devastating force. The fuel truck struck the bus broadside, causing it to roll onto its side while diesel fuel spilled across the intersection. The truck's trailer jackknifed, blocking traffic in all directions and trapping multiple vehicles in a maze of twisted metal and spreading fuel. Elena felt the impact tremor through her taxi as glass and debris rained down around them. Mrs. Patterson screamed and grabbed Elena's shoulder as they watched the bus slide across the intersection in a shower of sparks and breaking glass. Steam rose from multiple vehicle radiators while car alarms created a cacophony of electronic warnings. The smell of diesel fuel and hot metal filled the air, creating an atmosphere of immediate danger that made breathing difficult. Elena's combat medical training activated automatically, her mind switching from civilian driver to battlefield medic in the space of a heartbeat. She assessed the scene with eyes trained to triage mass casualty situations, identifying priorities, counting victims, evaluating resource requirements, and calculating response timelines. The bus contained at least 40 people, many of whom would have serious injuries requiring immediate intervention. "Stay in the car and call 911, Elena instructed Mrs. Patterson firmly, her voice carrying authority that surprised both of them. "Tell them we have a mass casualty incident with potential fuel fire hazard. Request multiple ambulances, fire department, and hazmat response." Elena stepped out of her taxi and surveyed the intersection more carefully. The overturned bus had passengers trapped inside, some visible through broken windows, others presumably thrown around the interior during the violent rollover. People were beginning to climb out of damaged vehicles, many bleeding from glass cuts and displaying signs of shock that would worsen without immediate attention. The fuel spill continued spreading across the intersection, creating vapor clouds that could ignite from any spark or flame. Elena noticed that several vehicles had electrical damage with exposed wiring, battery acid leaks, and hot engine components that posed immediate fire hazards. The situation required coordinated emergency response that wouldn't arrive for several crucial minutes. Citizens began gathering around the accident scene, most standing helplessly or using cell phones to record videos rather than providing assistance. Elena recognized the typical civilian response to mass casualties: confusion, panic, good intentions without organized action, and dangerous crowding that could interfere with emergency response when professionals arrived. A middle-aged man approached Elena, his face pale with shock and confusion. "My wife is trapped in that bus," he said, pointing toward broken windows where voices could be heard calling for help. "I can see her, but I can't reach her. The door is blocked and the windows are too high." Elena looked toward the overturned bus and could see movement inside. Passengers struggling to orient themselves in the sideways compartment, while others appeared motionless in positions that suggested serious injuries. The vehicle's weight had shifted onto its side, creating a precarious balance that could worsen if too many people attempted uncoordinated rescue efforts. "Sir, what's your name?" Elena asked the distraught man, her voice calm but urgent. "David Morrison. Please, you have to help my wife Sarah. She's pregnant, due next month. I can hear her calling, but I can't get to her." Elena's medical training provided immediate clarity about the additional complications pregnancy would create in a trauma situation. A pregnant woman in the third trimester could experience placental abruption, preterm labor, or other obstetric emergencies triggered by the accident's physical impact and emotional stress. More people began approaching Elena, apparently recognizing that she seemed less panicked than other bystanders and was asking relevant questions about the situation. Their assumption that she might know what to do placed unexpected pressure on her to either reveal her medical capabilities or maintain her cover while people potentially died from delayed treatment. "There's a man in the truck who's not moving," reported a teenage boy who had approached the fuel truck despite the obvious fire hazard. "He's bleeding from his head and his breathing sounds weird." Elena glanced toward the truck and could see the driver slumped over the steering wheel in a position that suggested either serious head trauma or the medical emergency that had caused the accident in the first place. Either condition required immediate assessment and intervention to prevent death, but approaching the vehicle meant exposing herself to both fire danger and potential scrutiny about her medical knowledge. The sound of sirens began echoing off downtown buildings, but Elena's experience with emergency response times suggested ambulances were still several minutes away. In mass casualty situations, those minutes could determine outcomes for multiple victims, whose conditions were deteriorating while well-meaning bystanders provided ineffective assistance or accidentally caused additional harm. Frank Morrison appeared at Elena's side, having abandoned his taxi several blocks away when traffic became impossible. His face showed the excitement that some people experience during disasters, a mixture of adrenaline and importance that came from being present during significant events. "Looks like you picked the wrong intersection, rookie," Frank said loudly, apparently enjoying Elena's obvious distress about the situation. "Good thing real emergency responders are coming to handle this properly." Frank's comment attracted attention from other bystanders who were looking for someone to take charge of the chaotic situation. Elena realized that her reputation for inappropriate medical advice had followed her even to this accident scene, creating additional barriers to helping people who desperately needed immediate care. "Maybe we should wait for the professionals," suggested another bystander who had overheard Frank's dismissive comment. "Probably best not to interfere with emergency response procedures." Elena stood at the intersection surrounded by injured people, spreading fuel, and gathering crowds while facing a choice that would define the rest of her life. She could maintain her anonymity and watch people die from preventable complications, or reveal her medical training and face the consequences of exposing the past. She'd spent 3 years trying to escape. The pregnant woman's voice could be heard from inside the overturned bus, calling for help in increasingly distressed tones that suggested developing complications. The truck driver's breathing was becoming more labored and irregular, indicating deteriorating condition that could become irreversible without immediate intervention. Elena looked around the intersection at faces turning toward her with expectation, desperation, and skepticism, realizing that her next decision would determine whether she remained Elena Rodriguez, the taxi driver, or revealed herself as Sergeant Rodriguez, the combat medic who had sworn to do no harm. Elena removed her jacket and rolled up her sleeves, the decision crystallizing in her mind like ice forming on water. The pregnant woman's cries were becoming more desperate, and the truck driver's breathing indicated imminent respiratory failure. Every second of hesitation meant permanent damage or death for people she could save. "David, I need you to listen carefully," Elena said to the distraught husband, her voice carrying unmistakable authority that cut through his panic. "I'm going to help your wife, but you need to follow my instructions exactly. Can you do that?" Before David could respond, Elena was moving toward the overturned bus with purposeful strides that bypassed every safety concern. Frank Morrison was shouting about fuel vapors and electrical hazards. She approached the vehicle like someone who had navigated similar wreckage before, her eyes scanning for structural integrity, entry points, and triage priorities with methodical precision. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Elena climbed onto the side of the bus, now facing skyward, and peered through a broken window into the chaotic interior. Passengers were scattered in unnatural positions, some conscious and calling for help, others ominously silent. She immediately identified 7 people requiring immediate intervention, including Sarah Morrison, who was conscious but showing signs of obstetric distress. "Sarah, can you hear me?" Elena called down into the bus, her voice calm and professional. "I'm Elena, and I'm going to get you out. First, I need you to tell me about any pain you're feeling." Sarah Morrison looked up with tear-streaked face, relief flooding her expression as someone finally seemed to know what they were doing. "My back hurts terribly, and I'm having contractions. Something's wrong with the baby." Elena's assessment confirmed her worst fears. Sarah was likely experiencing placental abruption triggered by the accident's impact, a condition that could kill both mother and child within minutes without proper intervention. But before she could address the obstetric emergency, she needed to establish scene safety and organize other rescues. "Frank, stop standing there and help me," Elena commanded with authority that surprised everyone present, including Frank himself. Position yourself by that window and be ready to receive patients. David, find me anything that can serve as bandages, shirts, towels, anything clean. Elena dropped through the bus window with fluid motion that demonstrated familiarity with tactical insertions into confined spaces. Inside the overturned vehicle, she moved with confidence that defied the chaos around her, immediately beginning rapid triage assessments that prioritized patients based on survivability and intervention requirements. An elderly man near the front of the bus was unconscious with obvious head trauma and irregular breathing that indicated increased intracranial pressure. Elena checked his pupils, assessed his airway, and positioned him to maintain circulation, while knowing she'd need to return to him within minutes or lose him entirely. "Ma'am, I'm Elena," she said to a middle-aged woman, clutching her arm at an unnatural angle. "You have a broken arm, but you're stable. I need you to help me by talking to that man over there, keeping him awake and alert. Say your name clearly and ask him to repeat it back." Elena's instructions turned conscious passengers into assistant medics, creating an organized response system within the overturned bus that maximized her ability to treat critical patients, while maintaining awareness of everyone's condition. Her authority was absolute and unquestioned. People followed her directions without hesitation, working her way towards Sarah Morrison. Elena encountered a teenage boy with severe abdominal trauma that suggested internal bleeding. His pulse was rapid and thready, his skin pale and clammy. Classic signs of hemorrhagic shock that would kill him without immediate surgical intervention. "What's your name?" Elena asked while applying pressure to his abdomen and assessing the extent of internal damage. "Tommy," the boy whispered, his voice weak but responsive. "It hurts really bad." Elena improvised a pressure bandage using torn clothing while simultaneously checking his pulse points and capillary refill time. "Tommy, you're going to be fine, but I need you to stay awake and keep talking to me. Tell me about school, your friends, anything that keeps you focused." She reached Sarah Morrison and immediately began an obstetric assessment that revealed the severity of the situation. Sarah was experiencing active labor complicated by placental abruption, a life-threatening emergency requiring immediate delivery under impossible conditions. "Sarah, your baby is coming now," Elena explained while positioning makeshift supplies around the confined space. "I know this isn't how you planned it, but we're going to deliver your daughter safely." Elena's hands moved with practiced precision, managing an emergency childbirth inside an overturned bus while simultaneously monitoring other patients and coordinating rescue efforts. Her medical training had prepared her for exactly these conditions: combat deliveries in hostile environments where everything depended on skill, improvisation, and absolute focus. The baby emerged amid chaos, not breathing initially, requiring Elena to perform neonatal resuscitation techniques while trapped in the sideways bus compartment. She cleared the airway, provided positive pressure ventilation, and stimulated breathing responses until the infant finally cried, announcing successful delivery to everyone present. "She's beautiful and healthy," Elena announced, wrapping the baby in clothing donated by other passengers while ensuring Sarah's postpartum bleeding remained controlled. "Sarah, you did perfectly. Your daughter is going to be fine." Outside the bus, crowds had gathered to watch Elena's rescue efforts, their initial skepticism replaced by awed silence as they witnessed medical expertise that exceeded anything they'd expected from a taxi driver. Frank Morrison stood speechless, watching Elena coordinate multiple medical emergencies with competence that challenged everything he thought he knew about professional hierarchies. Elena emerged from the bus, carrying the newborn while directing the evacuation of walking wounded and coordinating care for patients who couldn't be moved safely. She had transformed the chaotic accident scene into an organized triage operation that prioritized critical cases while ensuring everyone received appropriate care. "I need clean water and any available cloth," Elena called out to bystanders while examining the truck driver who was still unconscious behind the wheel. "This man is having a stroke. Someone call 911 and tell them we have multiple stroke patients requiring immediate transport." Elena's assessment of the truck driver revealed not accidental unconsciousness but active cerebrovascular accident that had caused the original collision. She positioned him to maintain airway patency while managing increased intracranial pressure through careful positioning and airway management techniques. The sound of approaching sirens grew louder, but Elena continued working through her patient list with systematic efficiency that ensured nobody was overlooked or inadequately treated. She had converted a mass casualty disaster into an organized medical response that saved lives through immediate intervention. During the crucial minutes before professional help arrived, when paramedics Marcus Johnson and Lisa Park arrived at the scene, they found not chaos but organized triage with patients properly stabilized, prioritized for transport, and accompanied by detailed verbal reports about their conditions and treatments provided. Elena met them with professional briefings that exceeded standard civilian assistance. Pregnant female, emergency delivery completed, placental abruption controlled, mother and infant stable for transport, Elena reported while transferring Sarah and her newborn to paramedic care. Teenage male, possible splenic laceration with Class 2 hemorrhagic shock, temporary bleeding control established, requires immediate surgical evaluation. Marcus and Lisa exchanged glances as Elena continued providing detailed patient reports with medical terminology and clinical assessments that demonstrated training far beyond civilian first aid capabilities. Her organization of the scene, quality of emergency interventions, and comprehensive patient documentation suggested professional medical background. The entire intersection fell silent as Elena finished transferring patients to professional medical care, her clothes blood-stained and torn, her face exhausted but determined. Bystanders who had witnessed her transformation from dismissed taxi driver to medical authority stood in shocked recognition that they had witnessed something extraordinary. Paramedic Marcus Johnson had worked mass casualty incidents for 8 years, but he'd never encountered civilian medical intervention of this caliber. As he loaded patients into ambulances, he kept glancing back at Elena, trying to reconcile the taxi driver he'd barely noticed with the medical professional who had just delivered a baby, stabilized multiple trauma patients, and organized a triage operation that rivaled veteran emergency response teams. "Lisa," Marcus whispered to his partner while they prepared Sarah Morrison for transport. "That taxi driver knew to check for placental abruption and managed postpartum hemorrhage. She performed neonatal resuscitation and gave us patient reports using correct medical terminology. This isn't first aid training." Lisa Park nodded while reviewing Elena's detailed notes about each patient's condition, treatment provided, and recommended next steps. "Look at this documentation," she said, showing Marcus Elena's handwritten patient assessments. Pulse rates, blood pressure estimates, neurological status, medication allergies she somehow discovered. This is professional-level emergency medicine. Dr. Sarah Chun arrived at the accident scene as part of the emergency response team, coordinating hospital preparation for incoming casualties. When she saw Elena directing the final patient transfers, recognition dawned slowly. This was the quiet taxi driver who regularly delivered passengers to Chicago General, but now she was functioning as an advanced life support provider with skills that exceeded many paramedics. "Excuse me," Dr. Chun approached Elena carefully, studying her blood-stained appearance and professional demeanor. "I'm Dr. Chun from Chicago General. I need to ask about your medical training. What you accomplished here required advanced trauma life support certification." Elena looked directly at Dr. Chun for the first time in 3 years of routine interactions, her carefully maintained anonymity crumbling under the weight of lives she'd chosen to save. I have some medical background, she said quietly, avoiding specifics while knowing the conversation was inevitable. Dr. Chun noticed Elena's precise medical terminology, her systematic approach to patient assessment, and the way she automatically followed protocols that took years to master. Some medical background doesn't explain emergency obstetrics or combat-level trauma management. Where did you train? Before Elena could respond, Colonel James Harrison appeared at the scene, having monitored emergency radio traffic from his office at nearby Fort Sheridan. Military installations maintained liaison relationships with civilian emergency services, and mass casualty incidents triggered automatic monitoring protocols that brought military medical personnel to assist if needed. Colonel Harrison studied the organized triage operation, the quality of medical interventions, and the systematic patient documentation that characterized military medical training. His eyes settled on Elena, noting her posture, movement patterns, and the way she'd positioned herself to maintain situational awareness while managing multiple medical priorities simultaneously. Sergeant Rodriguez, Colonel Harrison said quietly, his voice carrying recognition that sent shockwaves through everyone present. Combat Medic, 2nd Battalion, 3rd Brigade Combat Team, Afghanistan Deployment 2009 through 2012. Elena's carefully constructed civilian identity shattered in an instant. 3 years of hiding behind taxi driver anonymity dissolved as her military medical service became public knowledge. In front of everyone who had dismissed her as an unqualified civilian offering inappropriate medical advice, Frank Morrison stared in disbelief, his previous mockery about medical pretensions now revealed as ignorant dismissal of someone whose trauma experience exceeded his comprehension. The veteran taxi driver who had bragged about his medical knowledge realized he'd been humiliating a combat medic with 3 deployments and dozens of lives saved under enemy fire. "You're Elena Rodriguez," Colonel Harrison continued, his voice filled with respect that contrasted sharply with the dismissive treatment she'd received from Chicago's medical community. Recipient of 2 Bronze Stars, Combat Medical Badge, and Purple Heart, credited with 47 combat saves during Operation Enduring Freedom. Dr. Chun felt her assumptions about civilian medical knowledge crumble as she realized the taxi driver she barely acknowledged was a decorated combat veteran with trauma experience that exceeded her own emergency medicine training. Elena's medical insights hadn't been inappropriate civilian advice, but professional assessments from someone trained in battlefield medicine. The crowd of bystanders who had witnessed Elena's medical intervention listened in stunned silence as Colonel Harrison recounted her military service record. Many had assumed she was showing off or pretending to knowledge she didn't possess, not realizing they were watching a combat medic apply skills developed during life-and-death situations in hostile territories. Sergeant Rodriguez led medical operations during the Battle of Marja, Colonel Harrison explained to the assembled group. Her unit provided trauma care in forward operating bases where evacuation wasn't possible and supplies were limited. She's credited with developing improvised surgical techniques that became standard practice for combat medics throughout Afghanistan. Elena remained silent, unwilling to elaborate on service she'd spent 3 years trying to forget. The recognition felt like exposure rather than honor, revealing vulnerabilities she'd hidden behind taxi driver anonymity while forcing her to confront the gap between her capabilities and her chosen civilian role. Marcus Johnson approached Elena with newfound respect, realizing that her patient assessments and medical interventions represented professional expertise rather than lucky guesswork. "Ma'am, I need to apologize. We've been treating you like a civilian who got lucky instead of recognizing military medical training." Lisa Park joined the conversation, studying Elena's documentation with understanding that her systematic approach reflected military medical protocols adapted to civilian emergency response. "Your patient reports are better than most paramedic documentation. You've been watching us work and probably identifying improvements we should be making. Dr. Phillips arrived at the scene during the final patient transfers, immediately recognizing Elena as the taxi driver who had provided accurate medical diagnoses that hospital administration had dismissed as inappropriate civilian advice. Seeing Elena's blood-stained clothes and hearing Colonel Harrison's recitation of her military service record, Dr. Phillips understood that hospital policy had rejected legitimate medical expertise. You're the taxi driver who diagnosed compartment syndrome and suggested hypoglycemia workups, Dr. Phillips said, her voice reflecting embarrassment about the hospital's treatment of Elena's medical insights. We dismissed your observations because you didn't have credentials we recognized, not because your assessments were wrong. Elena's military medical background explained every medical observation that had seemed impossible for a civilian taxi driver. Her ability to predict hospital capacity reflected understanding of trauma volume and resource allocation. Her careful handling of medical supplies demonstrated familiarity with chain of custody protocols. Her environmental assessments showed tactical awareness developed during combat operations. The revelation transformed every previous interaction Elena had experienced with Chicago's medical community, recontextualizing dismissed advice as professional consultation from someone whose trauma experience exceeded most civilian medical training. Her silence about military service had protected her privacy, while denying the medical community access to expertise they desperately needed. Elena stood among the ambulances and emergency vehicles, watching the last patients being loaded for transport to Chicago General when Dr. Chun gently approached her again. The emergency physician's demeanor had completely changed from professional distance to genuine concern, recognizing the emotional toll that saving lives always extracted from those trained to bear that responsibility. Elena, I need to ask why. Someone with your medical training and combat experience chose to drive a taxi instead of working in emergency medicine, Dr. Chun said carefully. Your skills could save hundreds of lives in a hospital setting. Why hide your capabilities? Elena looked away, watching the fuel cleanup crews begin their hazardous material containment procedures, her silence stretching long enough that Dr. Chun wondered if she would answer at all. When Elena finally spoke, her voice carried weight that seemed disproportionate to the simple words she chose. Because the last time I used these skills in a professional capacity, 7 people died who shouldn't have, Elena said quietly. And I've been running from that responsibility ever since. Colonel Harrison overheard the conversation and moved closer, recognizing the psychological wounds that frequently accompanied military medical service. He'd debriefed dozens of combat medics whose careers ended not from physical injuries, but from emotional trauma that made practicing medicine impossible. Elena, you saved 47 documented lives during 3 deployments, Colonel Harrison said gently. Whatever happened doesn't diminish that record or the lives you saved today. Elena's expression hardened, and for the first time since the accident, her carefully controlled composure began to crack. Those 47 saves don't matter when you lose your entire medical team because of one decision, she said, her voice becoming strained. When you choose the wrong patient to prioritize and watch people die who trusted you to make the right call. The story emerged slowly, pulled from Elena like shrapnel being extracted from an old wound. During her final deployment in Afghanistan, Elena had been leading a forward medical team in a remote outpost when a coordinated attack overwhelmed their perimeter defenses. Multiple casualties arrived simultaneously, including both American soldiers and wounded civilians caught in the crossfire. We had 7 critical patients and resources for maybe 3, Elena explained, her hands unconsciously mimicking the triage motions she'd performed that day. I had to choose who received immediate surgery, who could wait, who we couldn't save. Combat medicine forces those decisions every day, but this time I was wrong. Elena described the impossible mathematics of battlefield medicine, where split-second Decisions determined who lived and who died based on assessments made under enemy fire with limited supplies and overwhelming casualties. She'd prioritized a young Afghan girl with abdominal trauma over Sergeant Maria Santos, her closest friend and medical partner. Maria was stable when I triaged her, Elena continued, her voice becoming barely audible. Conscious, responsive. Complaining about pain but not showing signs of immediate life threat. The girl was actively bleeding out, needed emergency surgery to survive, so I operated on the child first. The decision had seemed medically sound based on Elena's assessment. Following established triage protocols that prioritize salvageable patients with immediate life-threatening injuries. But while Elena worked to save the Afghan girl, Maria's condition deteriorated rapidly from internal bleeding that hadn't been immediately apparent during initial assessment. By the time I finished surgery on the girl, Maria was unconscious and in shock, Elena said, tears forming in her eyes for the first time since the accident. I spent 2 hours trying to save her life, but she died on that operating table while I held her hand and apologized for choosing wrong. The weight of that decision had destroyed Elena's confidence in her medical judgment, creating psychological trauma that made practicing medicine impossible despite her technical competence. Every patient became Maria Santos, every medical decision carried the potential for fatal error. Every life saved felt temporary compared to the permanent loss of her closest friend. The review board cleared me, Elena continued. I followed correct triage protocols, made reasonable decisions under impossible circumstances. But Maria was 26 years old, engaged to marry her college boyfriend when we got back, planning to use her military medical training to become a nurse practitioner in rural communities that needed health care. Dr. Chen understood the survivor guilt that frequently destroyed military medical careers, the psychological burden of making life and death decisions under conditions that guaranteed some patients wouldn't survive regardless of treatment quality. Elena's technical skills remained intact, but her emotional capacity to trust her own medical judgment had been shattered. After Maria died, I couldn't make medical decisions anymore, Elena admitted. Every assessment felt wrong. Every diagnosis seemed questionable. Every treatment plan carried the possibility of another fatal mistake. I'd freeze during medical emergencies, second-guessing everything I'd learned during 8 years of training. Elena's discharge from military service had been voluntary but inevitable. Her medical career ended by psychological wounds that made practicing medicine professionally impossible. She'd chosen taxi driving because it utilized her desire to help people while avoiding the life and death responsibilities that triggered memories of Maria's death. For 3 years, I've been driving people to hospitals instead of working in them, Elena said. Helping indirectly, observing from the margins, contributing without taking responsibility for outcomes. It felt safer than risking another Maria Santos. The accident had forced Elena to confront the conflict between her self-imposed limitations and her fundamental nature as a healer. Watching people die while she possessed the skills to save them had proven impossible, breaking through 3 years of psychological barriers that had kept her medical knowledge locked away. Today I had to choose between letting people die and risking being wrong again, Elena concluded. I couldn't watch that pregnant woman and her baby die because I was afraid of making another mistake. But now I'm right back where I started, making medical decisions that could destroy lives if I'm wrong. Dr. Chun placed a gentle hand on Elena's shoulder, recognizing the profound courage required for someone with Elena's trauma to risk medical practice again. Elena, you saved 11 lives today, including a newborn who wouldn't exist without your intervention. That's not a mistake. That's exactly why you became a medic in the first place. The news of Elena's heroic medical intervention spread through Chicago's emergency medical community within hours, creating ripple effects that transformed how healthcare professionals viewed civilian expertise and military veteran integration. Dr. Sarah Chun immediately called an emergency department meeting to address the systemic failures that had led them to dismiss legitimate medical knowledge based on occupational bias, rather than demonstrated competence. We need to acknowledge that our institution rejected valuable medical insights because they came from someone we categorized as unqualified, Dr. Chun announced to the assembled emergency staff. Elena Rodriguez offered accurate diagnoses that improved patient outcomes, and we dismissed her contributions based on assumptions about taxi driver knowledge rather than evidence of her medical competence. The meeting resulted in immediate policy changes at Chicago General. The hospital administration rescinded their memo prohibiting medical staff from consulting with non-licensed personnel, replacing it with protocols for recognizing and utilizing expertise from unconventional sources, particularly military veterans whose medical training might not be immediately apparent. Dr. Phillips volunteered to lead a new initiative identifying veterans working in civilian roles throughout the hospital's service area. The program aimed to create formal pathways for military medical personnel to contribute their expertise to civilian healthcare while respecting their choices about professional involvement levels. Elena spent 3 years contributing to our medical system quietly and indirectly, Dr. Phillips explained during the program's planning sessions. How many other veterans are working in our communities with skills we're not recognizing or utilizing effectively? The Veteran Identification Initiative discovered 17 former military medical personnel working in various civilian roles throughout Chicago's healthcare network. They included janitors with field surgery experience, security guards trained in emergency medicine, food service workers with paramedic backgrounds, and maintenance staff who had managed medical equipment in combat zones. Marcus Johnson and Lisa Park redesigned their paramedic training protocols to include consultation sessions with military veterans who possessed relevant medical experience. They recognized that Elena's tactical medical training offered perspectives on emergency care that civilian emergency medicine education didn't typically address. Elena organized a mass casualty scene better than most paramedics with 15 years of experience, Marcus explained to his training coordinator. Military medical personnel learn resource management, improvised treatment techniques, and environmental assessment skills that we should be incorporating into civilian emergency response training. The paramedic training partnership with military veterans became a model program that other emergency services throughout Illinois adopted. Veterans contributed expertise in austere environment medicine, resource-limited treatment protocols, and psychological trauma management that enhanced civilian emergency medical capabilities. Chicago General's Emergency Department established a voluntary consulting program allowing military medical veterans to provide informal advice during complex cases. Elena initially declined participation, but eventually agreed to review challenging trauma cases when her insights could improve patient outcomes, without requiring her to resume full medical practice. Hospital Security Chief Robert Martinez initiated comprehensive background reviews of all civilian contractors working in medical facilities, not for security clearance purposes, but to identify hidden medical expertise among support staff. The review discovered maintenance workers with extensive medical equipment experience, cleaning staff with infection control training, and transportation personnel with patient care backgrounds. We've been treating people with advanced medical training like they're unqualified civilians, Martinez reported to hospital administration. Elena Rodriguez was delivering medical supplies while we assumed she didn't understand sterilization protocols or chain of custody requirements. She knew more about medical logistics than some of our trained staff. The revelation about Elena's background prompted Chicago's taxi company to survey their drivers for military medical experience. They discovered 8 veterans with combat medical training who had chosen driving careers after military service, representing an untapped resource for emergency response support during mass casualty incidents. Elena's taxi company developed Partnerships with emergency services to utilize veteran drivers as auxiliary support during major medical emergencies. The program created formal protocols for veteran drivers to assist with patient transport, scene organization, and communication coordination when professional emergency responders were overwhelmed. Dr. Martinez established regular case review sessions where civilian and military medical perspectives were deliberately integrated to improve diagnostic accuracy and treatment protocols. Elena's suggestions about environmental factors affecting patient presentations led to significant improvements in emergency department assessment procedures. The Emergency Medicine Residency Program at Chicago General incorporated military medical training principles into their curriculum, recognizing that combat medicine's emphasis on rapid assessment, resource management, and improvised treatment provided valuable skills for civilian emergency medicine. Elena's influence extended beyond formal medical settings to everyday emergency preparedness throughout Chicago's transportation network. Taxi drivers received basic medical training based on military first aid protocols, creating a citywide network of civilians capable of providing immediate medical assistance during accidents or emergencies. The Chicago Fire Department modified their emergency response protocols to actively seek information from veteran civilians present at accident scenes. Recognizing that military medical training provided valuable situational assessment capabilities that enhanced professional emergency response effectiveness, Elena began teaching informal medical education sessions for taxi drivers, focusing on recognition of medical emergencies, basic trauma assessment, and when to provide assistance versus when to clear the area for professional responders. Her classes became mandatory training for all drivers, working medical transport routes. The success of Elena's integration into Chicago's emergency medical network inspired similar programs in other cities, creating a national movement to identify and utilize military medical veterans working in civilian roles. The Department of Veterans Affairs developed formal partnerships with civilian emergency services to facilitate veteran medical expertise integration. Local news coverage of Elena's story prompted dozens of military medical veterans to contact Chicago General about participating in the consulting program. Many had been working in civilian roles while maintaining their medical knowledge privately, waiting for opportunities to contribute without resuming full medical practice. The cultural shift extended beyond healthcare to broader recognition of hidden expertise in unexpected places. Elena's story became a case study in business schools about the importance of recognizing and utilizing diverse sources of knowledge within organizations rather than making assumptions based on job titles or apparent qualifications. 6 months after the accident, Elena received formal recognition from the American Red Cross for her contributions to emergency medical response training and veteran integration programs. She accepted the award while emphasizing that many veterans possessed similar capabilities that remained unrecognized in civilian communities. Elena Rodriguez showed us that expertise doesn't always announce itself through traditional credentials. Dr. Chun reflected during a medical conference presentation about the case. Her story reminds us to look beyond job titles and occupational categories to find the knowledge and skills that can save lives and improve our medical systems. Elena Rodriguez never returned to full-time medical practice, but she didn't remain just a taxi driver either. 6 months after the intersection accident, she accepted a position as emergency medical coordinator for Chicago's Veteran Services, creating the first civilian role that acknowledged her unique combination of combat medical expertise and understanding of veteran transition challenges. Her new position involved identifying military medical veterans throughout Chicago's civilian workforce and developing programs that utilize their expertise while respecting their choices about professional medical practice. Elena understood better than anyone the complex reasons why skilled veterans might choose anonymity over recognition, healing over heroism, quiet contribution over visible leadership. The transformation extended far beyond Chicago's medical community. Elena's story became required reading in business leadership courses as an example of how organizations systematically overlook valuable expertise by making assumptions based on job titles, educational credentials, or social positioning rather than demonstrated competence and actual capability. Corporate executives began questioning their own hiring practices and talent recognition systems. How many maintenance workers possessed engineering expertise? How many administrative assistants had advanced management training? How many quiet employees offered solutions that went unheard because their ideas came from unexpected sources? Elena's consulting work with civilian emergency services revealed that military veterans had dispersed throughout every level of society, often working in roles that utilized only a fraction of their capabilities. She discovered former Air Force pilots driving delivery trucks, Navy engineers working construction, Army intelligence analysts stocking grocery shelves, each carrying knowledge that could benefit their civilian communities if properly recognized and respected. The veteran integration programs Elena developed became models for similar initiatives across the country. Other cities discovered their own hidden networks of military expertise embedded in civilian workforces, creating formal pathways for veterans to contribute specialized knowledge without requiring them to resume military-style hierarchical structures or high-stress professional environments. Elena's personal healing journey paralleled her professional impact. Working with other military medical veterans who had experienced similar trauma helped her understand that survivor guilt was a common burden shared by many who had made life-and-death decisions under impossible circumstances. She learned to reframe Maria Santos's death not as her personal failure, but as the tragic cost of warfare that no individual decision could have prevented. The therapeutic value of helping other veterans integrate their military expertise into civilian roles provided Elena with purpose that honored her past while building toward a meaningful future. Each veteran she helped find appropriate civilian roles felt like a small tribute to Maria's memory, transforming personal loss into community healing. Chicago's emergency medical system became a national model for civilian-military integration, demonstrating how military medical expertise could enhance civilian healthcare without requiring veterans to abandon their chosen civilian lifestyles. The program's success attracted attention from healthcare systems throughout the United States, leading to widespread adoption of similar veteran integration initiatives. Elena's story resonated particularly strongly with people who had experienced being underestimated or dismissed because of their appearance, background, or current circumstances. Letters arrived from teachers working in restaurants, artists driving delivery trucks, scientists cleaning offices, each sharing stories of hidden expertise that society failed to recognize or value appropriately. The broader cultural conversation. Elena's story addressed fundamental questions about how society assigns value to different types of knowledge and experience. Why did medical expertise become more credible when it came from someone wearing scrubs rather than taxi driver clothing? Why did civilian institutions assume that military medical training was irrelevant to civilian medical practice? Educational institutions began examining their own biases about student potential and capability. Elena's story became a case study in education courses about the importance of recognizing diverse forms of intelligence and experience rather than privileging traditional academic credentials over practical expertise gained through unconventional pathways. Elena frequently spoke at medical conferences and veteran transition programs, sharing insights about the hidden costs of expertise and visibility. She emphasized that society lost valuable knowledge when people felt forced to hide their capabilities to fit into expected social roles or avoid unwanted attention and responsibility. The most dangerous assumption we make, Elena would tell audiences, is that competence announces itself loudly and expertise wears obvious uniforms. The person who might save your life could be the one you've never thought to notice, the one whose background you've never bothered to learn, the one whose contributions you've dismissed as inappropriate or irrelevant. The intersection where Elena had revealed her medical expertise became an informal memorial site where people left flowers and notes, honoring quiet heroes in their own communities. The makeshift memorial grew to include tributes to teachers who had changed lives without recognition, mechanics who had prevented accidents through careful work, janitors who had maintained spaces that enabled others to succeed. Elena's influence extended to policy discussions about veteran services and employment programs. Her example demonstrated that successful veteran transition required more than job placement. It needed recognition systems that identified and utilized military expertise appropriately, rather than treating all veterans as requiring complete retraining for civilian roles. 5 years after the accident, Elena established the Rodriguez Foundation, providing grants for programs that identified and supported hidden expertise in unexpected places. The foundation funded initiatives ranging from veteran integration programs to recognition systems for undervalued workers in various industries. The foundation's motto, "Expertise Lives Everywhere," became a rallying cry for organizations committed to recognizing talent regardless of its packaging. Elena's legacy shifted from personal heroism to systemic change that helped society become more effective at identifying and utilizing human potential. Elena's story continues to challenge people to examine their own assumptions about competence and capability. Who are the quiet experts in your workplace, your community, your family? What knowledge are you missing because you haven't thought to ask the right questions to the right people? The lesson Elena Rodriguez taught isn't just about not underestimating veterans or healthcare workers or taxi drivers. It's about recognizing that extraordinary capability often chooses ordinary disguises, that real expertise frequently works from shadows, and that the person who might change everything could be the one you see every day but have never truly noticed. In a world that celebrates loudness over competence and credentials over character, Elena's story reminds us that the most important conversations might happen with the people we've been overlooking. The next time you encounter quiet confidence, remember Elena Rodriguez and ask yourself, what might I learn if I paid attention to what this person actually knows? Today, Elena Rodriguez continues her work in Chicago, but her impact reaches far beyond one city's emergency services. She's proven that the most powerful force in any community isn't the person with the loudest voice or the most impressive title. It's the person with the quiet determination to help others, regardless of whether anyone notices or gives credit. Elena's story forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. How many Elena Rodriguezes are we walking past every day? How many people with extraordinary capabilities are we dismissing because they don't look like our idea of an expert? The janitor who notices structural problems before engineers do. The cashier who remembers every regular customer's personal struggles. The bus driver who spots medical emergencies before symptoms become obvious. Think about the people in your life right now. The coworker you've never really talked to. The neighbor who always seems to know exactly what's happening in the community. The service worker who handles every interaction with unusual competence and care. What stories might they carry? What knowledge might they possess? What problems could they solve if someone just thought to ask? Elena's transformation from invisible taxi driver to recognized lifesaver didn't happen because she changed. It happened because circumstances forced others to see what had always been there. But we don't have to wait for emergencies to recognize the hidden expertise around us. If this story made you think differently about the people you encounter every day, you're not alone. Subscribe to our channel for more stories that challenge assumptions and reveal the extraordinary humanity hiding in ordinary moments. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that their contributions matter, even when they go unnoticed. Because somewhere in your community, there's another Elena Rodriguez waiting for someone to recognize that expertise doesn't always wear the uniform you expect. And maybe, just maybe, that person is you. Hit subscribe and never miss stories that change how you see the world.